In the editorial page of the Nassau Guardian, Tuesday, March 19, 2024, a letter appeared under the caption, "Bahamian Diaspora Must Vote Trump." The use of the word must suggests that the writer meant to present his opinion as a prescription. Unlike any other prescription, its validity is to be found in the reasoning that leads to this conclusion. Editors of the mainstream news media in the Caribbean probably receive thousands of letters to the editor every week, so they have to be careful which one they decide to publish. And for a major publication like the Nassau Guardian, more care is required because of the danger that their publication may be copied by other news media in other islands. Often we expect that some of the published letters to the editor would be the ones that editors find some sympathy with. So what does an editor and his or her staff have to be wary of? I think it should be those letters that masquerade as opinions but are really message carriers, especially political messages. So as an international reader of the Nassau Guardian, Tuesday, March 19, 2024, I have become alarmed that the editors of this most respectable news medium in the Bahamas would allow the publication of political talking points of Donald Trump, or at worst, allow circulation exposure to someone to simply repeat observations of an auntie or uncle living in the USA as worthwhile opinion on guidance as to how the Bahamian diaspora, and by deduction other Caribbean nationals, should vote in the next presidential elections carded for November 2024. The statement in this letter that should have precipitated an editorial red flag is the one that stated that the Democratic Party is trying to use the courts to block Trump's nomination. Everyone knows that Trump's troubles with the courts are essentially the consequences of him breaking the law and refusing to be prosecuted. The left-leaning group CREW, which means Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which brought the lawsuit against Trump's candidacy that landed at the Supreme Court, had targeted other Republican officials as it is their constitutional right. There was the Ottawa County Commissioner, Couy Griffin, a founder of the promotional group Cowboys for Trump, which is the only elected official thus far to have been banned from office in connection with the Capitol attack, which disrupted Congress as it was trying to certify Joe Biden's 2020 electoral victory over Trump. Even though the writer does ask a pertinent question, under whose presidency does the Bahamian diaspora fare better? Hanging his decision point on, and I quote, President Joe Biden's inflation rate, which is a staggering 17.3%, is more platform rhetoric than factual. Once a writer starts to label inflation as belonging to this or that president, he has stepped out of the realm of economic analysis and has opted for a platform of political slogans. So why would anyone seeking to seriously write an opinion in the Nassau Guardian wantonly abandon economics in the statement with such loaded labels? Is it that he is anxious to jump from the political slogan to the assumption that his interpretation of the past is the indication of what to expect in the future? To move from an economic analysis to future expectations is much more difficult than to move from political sloganeering. So what knowledge can we honestly gain from reading the data? According to that CPI data, the percentage change in the approximate total consumer price index (CPI) increased in December 2017 from 12 months earlier, that is the first year of Trump's reign, by about 2.1%. It again increased in December 2018 from 12 months earlier, the second year of Trump's incumbency, by 1.9%, and it increased in December 2019 for the same period by 1.3%. So all these are positive numbers, meaning that prices were increasing under President Trump. So the only true fact that the writer can make is that they increased at a higher rate during the first 2 years under President Biden than they did under President Trump. And that is true. However, to project that into the future, we must add context to this comparison. We have to recognize that the inflationary situation in the United States under the first 2 years of the Biden administration had been relatively severe due to global events relating to COVID-19, supply chain restraints, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Monica Piazzesi, a professor of economics at Stanford University, has pointed this out for all those who would like to use the CPI to gain political points. Piazzesi noted that this inflation was, quote, an international phenomenon, end quote, and she correctly cited similar high rates occurring in Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom, which she said, quote, makes it hard to blame the president of just one country, end quote. However, using the inflation rate as a comparative measure of how things are likely to turn out in the future is more problematic than you may think. The first weakness is how the inflation rate is calculated. Using the US Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index data, which measures price changes in consumer goods and services over time, the first issue is that this metric comes with some serious warning from the very persons who produced the data. According to the Bureau, this is how you should assign reliability to these numbers. A. The CPI can be used to recognize periods of inflation and deflation. B. Significant increases in the CPI within a short time frame might indicate a period of inflation, and significant decreases in the CPI within a short time frame might indicate a period of deflation. C. However, the CPI includes volatile food and oil prices. It might not be a reliable measure of inflationary and deflationary periods. But here's the most compelling caution from this bureau, and I quote, when using the CPI, please note that it is not applicable to all consumers and should not be used to determine relative living costs. Additionally, the CPI is a statistical measure vulnerable to sampling error, since it is based on a sample of prices and not the complete average. Second weakness in Trump's talking points is that these talking points are never meant to educate anyone on national economic trends, nor on what to expect if he gets into power again. We have to do research on the former and read between the lines for the latter to gain a better guide as to what our Bahamian diaspora needs to be concerned with. At a campaign rally in Georgia in March 9th, Trump said, and I quote, the fact is, under Biden, we have a 3-year inflation rate of almost 50%. Trump went even bigger in a CNBC interview on March the 11th, saying, I believe we have a cumulative inflation of over 50%. As the Washington Post noted on March the 14th, 2024, Mr. Trump's claims aren't close to being true. Federal figures show that the cumulative inflation from when Biden took office in January 2021 through February 2024 was 18.6%, not even half of the 50% that Trump said. And that is the cumulative inflation. By the time we come to this month in 2024, we see that the inflation rate is down to about 3.2%. So, in spite of what Mr. Trump may believe, repeating his erroneous claims do not change his falsehood into truth. The claim that the US inflation rate jumped from 1.7% in 2017 under Donald Trump to 17.3% in 2021 under President Joe Biden is also patently false. While inflation did go up during the early years of the Biden administration, the numbers often repeated in popular social media posts comparing the rate in each year from 2017 through 2022 are not correct, according to the economic experts and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The correct percentage for 2017 was 2.1%, while in 2021 it was around 7%. Trump also pretends to be reporting on personal sufferings by feeding anecdotal references which are themselves false. In Florida, in a speech in October 2023, he said this: "Today you have to pay $5, $6, and even $7 per gallon for gas." At that time that he was saying so, the state of Florida's average price for a gallon of regular gas was about $3.42 per gallon, and the national average was $3.66 per gallon. So, if your friend's aunt is telling you otherwise, advise them to shop around, because none of the 8,237 Florida stations were selling gas for as much as $5 per gallon that day, let alone $6 or even $7. The third issue with using Donald Trump's economic claims is that he himself has no respect for economic data. He just tosses out numbers, hoping that his unsuspecting followers will repeat them ad nauseum. On February 9, 2024, he stated in a speech to the National Rifle Association that, quote, "food costs 40, 50, 60% more than it did just a few years ago." All 5 presidents before Biden all saw overall food prices rise from 5.3% under Trump to 12.3% under George H.W. Bush during their first 3 years in office. By contrast, in Biden's first 3 years, food prices increased by 20.3%. That rise stemmed from the same causes that drove overall inflation higher, that is, supply chain difficulties during and after the coronavirus pandemic. This was exacerbated by early Biden policies that put more money into American hands when goods supplies were limited. Now, that was a judgment call. But even the unusually high food inflation during Biden's first 3 years did not come close to 40 or to 60% as cited by Trump. Interestingly, the writer does not make any comment about the fact that during the Biden's presidency, the rate of job creation exceeded that of any of the 4 previous presidents in his time. This is a big problem in basing an argument for voter preference on the inflation rate. Historically, the inflation rate is the indicator that has been easily weaponized to instill fear about the future. Hitler's rise to power was fueled on a remarkable success in suppressing and increasing prices, but its effects were not less severe. It was clear to Hitler and the other potentates of the Nazi Germany that in order to galvanize the support of the German people, he needed to promise that under his regime there would not be another massive price inflation like the one we witnessed in the Weimar regime 1914 to 1923. Now that we can look back into history, do you think that this should have been a convincing argument for Jews in the German Republic, even though they were witnessing how his MAGA style supporters were interpreting his policies on the streets? Remember that Trump called all of us from the developing South states a whole countries. Do you think that if he gets the opportunity to deport such opponents, that a Bahamian diaspora vote will save us? The best prescription we can give to our colleagues in the diaspora is this: watch what they do, not what they say.